We just turn on the recording. Okay, we're ready to go. So again, everyone, welcome. My name is Bert Dick. I'm Vice President for Membership for the National Space Society. So thank you for joining us for this virtual space forum. When we get back to the moon, what then? And on behalf of Larry Ahern, who's the Vice President for Chapters, and we want to thank you for joining us. This is co-sponsored by the membership and chapters of NSS. And we're really glad you could join us tonight. We've got a great presentation for you, and we're looking forward to some really great dialogue. And I just want to go through a few of the items. But first, thank you again for joining us. We know it's a difficult time right now. We hope you and your families are safe. But we hope to have a really informative session this evening. Before we start, a little bit of etiquette, because the way Zoom works, it can be very disruptive if you're not paying attention. So hopefully you're in a quiet room or location. I'm asking everybody except our panelists to turn off their cameras. They're not needed. They can only act as a distraction for everybody else. So please turn them off right now. This means everybody. And if you're thinking I'm not talking to you, I am talking to you. So please turn them off, and also remain muted. All of your background noise can be heard. And plus, it also, the way Zoom is set up, you can actually show up on the screen if we hear background noise, and that interrupts the presentations and our panelists. So please, you're going to use chat to ask any questions. And we do have a lot of questions that were submitted prior to this on our survey when you registered. And our host is going to try to get to a lot of those as he talks to our panelists. So please be patient. We don't know if we're going to get through all of them because we had a lot of questions come in. I asked everybody, yes? I'm asking everyone to be respectful of the panelists and the attendees. And again, this session is going to be recorded. Please, everybody, please be on mute. Some people are not doing that, and I'm going to have to do that. So again,
you have to do that.
Just do it, Bert.
I am. I'm doing it. I'm doing it as.
Hey, I haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah. Everybody, please, no talking except for the panelists now. So our agenda, we're going to turn it over to our host to introduce our panelists. There's going to be some great discussion. They'll have Q&A, and we're going to close off by just talking about the next town hall. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to our host for this evening, Jeffrey Liss, who's our member of the NSS Board of Directors. And Jeffrey, it's all yours.
Okay, can you reduce the share screen?
Yep, I'm going to turn that off.
Thank you. Okay, very good. Again, good evening and welcome, everybody. It's so nice to see so many of you here tonight. As Bert says, I'm a member of the Board of Directors of NSS, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as your host tonight. The topic is one that most of us have wondered about since we were kids. When we get back to the moon, what then? And to consider that, we have a very distinguished panel for you. They are Robert Zubrin, who's president of Pioneer Astronautics and president of the Mars Society. And Robert might properly be considered a principal father of the now well-accepted way to go for space settlement, living off the land using in situ resources. The next speaker is Dr. Douglas Plata, who's a physician and a public health specialist and the founder of the Space Development Network. Our third panelist is David Chevron, retired NASA engineer and a technology consultant. And Bert, if you will post in the chat room the URLs, which links to everyone's biographies, I'd appreciate that. Can you do that?
Going to do that now? Yep.
Thank you. To save time, well, anyway, let me explain first what will not be covered tonight. We will not talk about whether the first solar system goal should be Leo, Moon, Mars, or asteroids. The focus will be on, to the extent the moon is a goal, what will be the likely or appropriate course of development. We won't be talking about what transportation systems will be used to get people and materials to the moon. We won't talk about whether what is needed to be brought to the moon will be brought in a few large increments or many smaller increments. We won't talk about the pace of construction and the expansion of the outpost. What will be built on the moon will be built, whatever the pace. We won't talk about legal questions, how those will be resolved should only minimally affect what has to be built. And we won't talk about whether expanded lunar settlements must maintain on the ground enough launch vehicles to evacuate every person at the same time. What will be covered is what will be brought to the moon, regardless of how it gets there, and how we will use it, and how we'll use in situ lunar resources to build the first expandable permanent lunar outpost. And I might know if this might be referred to as an outpost, a proto-settlement, or a settlement. But for brevity tonight, I think it will be referred to mostly as an outpost. Now, let me explain a little bit about the format. We have a very limited time for a planet-wide, or rather moon-wide subject. Each panelist, as I call on them, will have a few minutes to address each of the issues. We basically broke them down to 4 main issues. And 3 or 5 or 10-minute responses by multiple panelists on 4 issues can quickly add up to more than the 90 minutes that we have scheduled. So if you will note, our panels will indeed be challenged to edit down their years of experience into a few pithy minutes of presentation. But I can assure you, by the end of this broadcast, you should have a very good overview of when we get to the moon, what then. All right, we have 4 issues that are going to be considered, and I'll just read them now very briefly. Number 1, what are all the in situ resources that could be available on the moon to be used for the outpost and its occupants? 2, after any precursor exploration, robotic or crewed or both, what kind of location do you think will prove to be the best choice for the first permanent outpost? Very briefly, why that choice? 3, what kind of habitat do you think can and will be built for this first expandable outpost? Why? And 4, and this would be the largest segment, how would the outpost be designed to be expanded? So let's go to the first question. Oh, by the way, if we don't have too many of you drop off by the scheduled end time and powers that be don't mind and you don't mind, we can then extend for a few more minutes to deal with some of the specific questions we've already received and maybe some new ones. Okay, first question. What are all the in situ resources that could be available on the moon to be used for the outpost and its occupants? Our first speaker on that tonight will be Robert Zubrin. Robert, take it away.
Okay. So, first of all, there are no resources on the moon. There's only raw materials. The natural resources do not exist anywhere on Earth, the moon, Mars. There's only natural raw materials. It is human ingenuity that turns materials into resources. Now, there are materials certainly on the moon that can readily be turned into resources. The one that people talk about the most in terms recently is, of course, water ice, which appears to exist within permanently shadowed craters on the moon. If the appropriate technologies can be developed, we can send machines into the craters to mine that ice, bring it out, and it can be used as water or as hydrogen and oxygen, which means rocket propellant. Hydrogen can also be used as a reductant to take oxides and basically react with the oxygen part to produce water and release the metal. Now, the easiest oxide to do that with that is present in any quantity on the moon is iron oxide. It's far easier to reduce iron oxide than, for instance, silicon dioxide, which is very plentiful on the moon, but iron oxide can be reduced to temperatures of 700 centigrade. Silicon oxide requires 1500 centigrade, which is to say temperatures above the melting point of steel, so you can't do that in a steel vessel. Same thing, aluminum oxide, very plentiful on the moon, but much harder to reduce. So in terms of chemicals, the first chemicals that we'll be able to access on the moon will be hydrogen, oxygen, and iron. And iron can be used to make steel. You only need about 0.5% by weight of carbon to react with the iron to turn it into steel, which is a superior material. And of course, it won't rust on the moon. So you don't need stainless steel. Carbon steel will do quite well. The amount of carbon, while carbon may not be readily accessible on the moon, there will be carbon waste from the life support system. And a very, in other words, 1 ton of food waste can make 200 tons of steel combined with iron. Now, beyond that, there is simply the raw material of the moon that is the undifferentiated mass, which can obviously be used for shielding in sandbags, or one can envision bringing things, as it were, kind of like large Dixie cups to the moon. You can throw the sand, the regolith in it, and then you could construct it readily, or you can heat it and fuse it and turn it into bricks, in which case you won't need such things. And you can make brick structures of all types, and so forth. Or finally, one could, if there are lava tubes on the moon, there you have already built underground structures, which could be gone into and provide shielding areas and potentially even pressurizable areas. So those are some of the resources that could be created on the moon.
David, you want to jump in? Pardon me,
Hey.
Doug, I think first.
Oh, it's,
Doug, do you want to jump in?
I think it's David, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was mine. Okay, so the focus that everybody's kind of got on water, I think is a result of some work that we did back in 2014 and 15 and published with Evolvable Lunar Architecture, which came up with a proposed plan for being able to use the ice to get water to make propellant and enable Mars missions and eliminate the, or reduce, not eliminate, but reduce the number of flights needed from, say, an SLS to do that. That study has gone worldwide. I have seen references to that study in probably 8 different languages. The concern that I have as an engineer and I do systems engineering, integration, and overall architecture from the practical standpoint of building everything and the risk analysis and trying to minimize overall risk. The thing that strikes me about that is, we really didn't look at the other materials that Bob just referred to very much at all, really, in that study. And I think that was kind of one of the short-sighted parts of the study. So I had initiated another study to go follow on and look at what all those different capabilities of different materials might be for the uses that they have. The water obviously has got a good merit with the business case and the need for water. I think for human survival, oxygen or air is higher on the list of what you need to worry about when you're in a survival situation. So I personally tend to like the idea of getting oxygen first. And you can use oxygen for propellant. It's 80% of the mass of a hydrogen oxygen system, close to that for a hydrogen or for a methane oxygen system. So there's plenty of use for it. If you have byproducts from that, like the iron oxide, or if you have enough energy, the aluminum, those are things that can be built that can help you construct your machinery. You don't have to carry all the machinery with you to do the production of the ice. So, that's an alternative. I'm not saying that's got to be the right way to do it. One of the things we like to do in the engineering development cycle is trade studies. And so I would kind of argue that a trade study to decide what really is the best sequence is the right thing to do. I think it's very likely it'll end up focusing on water, but it may not be that the water is really the first thing that you want to go get. The other thing about focusing just on water is there's a tendency to optimize your process on what you're trying to produce. And a process that's optimized for water may be greatly sub-optimized for producing anything else. So again, it's a matter of trying to make the end-to-end system as efficient as possible within budget constraints and costs to do it. So yeah, that's basically what I think. Just having a broader understanding of what resources are out there, doing enough prospecting to go see, where these things are, and looking at other things that might be considered natural resources, things like lava tubes and some terrain features are things I think of as other resources. The vacuum itself is a resource. The radiation may be a resource. The 1,6G may be a resource. We may be able to do things and produce materials with 1,6G that we can't do in 1G and we can't do in 0G for microgravity. So those are the things I would consider.
Doug, can you supplement with some of the other resources? Might be available?
Yes, absolutely. Let me just mention about the water. Let me give some specific numbers that I think our audience needs to bear in mind, and that is the LCROSS experiment back in 2009 impacted a permanently shadowed crater, kicked up the icy regolith into the sunlight, and we got spectroscopic signatures of not just ice, but several different organic chemicals. I should say not just water, but several organic moieties. And it came out to about 5.6% plus or minus of the regolith by mass. And that's 1 part per 18. And so that is a confirmatory study. There have been a lot of suggestions before that. And so I think I agree with my other two colleagues here that water ranks quite high in terms of interest. Now, let me just mention about the organics. I think we need to read all of the LCROSS results, including the organics. We know that ammonia was found there. There's several different types of carbon chemicals that were found, sulfur as well, and some other things. And the amount of organics is not a small amount. The numbers, they have error bars that are not real tight, but the average, it seems, is about 1/6 of the weight of the ice is organic. So if we are harvesting propellant quantities of water, the side stream flow of the organics is going to be sufficient for recycling. To replenish the recycling losses.
What organics are you talking about, particularly for those?
So there's, I mentioned ammonia. There's also methane. There's acetylene, I believe. There's carbon monoxide, and I think 1 or 2 others that we detected. Several different species with carbon in it.
I've heard the term creep mentioned. Can someone care to explain what that refers to?
I'm getting to that, Jeffrey. So creep is a rock that we have these rocks brought back from the moon. They are KREEP. K is potassium, P is phosphorus, REE is rare earth elements. We actually have a meteorite we believe from Lalande crater on the moon. We actually have that in our hands. This is not from Apollo, it was a meteorite. So we know the concentration of the creep rocks or the potassium and the phosphorus from that location, and P and K are part of NPK, which is the fertilizer for plants. So there's that resource. I would like to also mention with metals that 1% of the highlands is unoxidized iron. Micrometeorites create little crucibles, and they reduce the iron. Also, if we could find a sort of a glancing strike of a nickel iron meteorite crater, then we could have large quantities of unoxidized nickel iron, and that would be extremely useful if we could go ahead and find that, because separating the oxygen from the metals is pretty energy expensive. And finally, I'd like to mention about, I don't think the other two have mentioned this, and that is the peaks of nearly eternal light. That is a major resource at the poles of the moon, and that's why I think going to the poles would be the first place to go.
Can you explain what that is? The peaks of eternal light?
Okay, so the
Sounds
moon
poetic rather than functional.
Sure. So the moon is not tilted very much. It's about 1.5 degrees, I think. And because of that, there's certain craters at the north and south pole in which the sunlight never gets to the bottom. So these are permanently shadowed craters. And I think we have good data, especially the L-cross results from Cabeus crater, that there's ice there. And then around the rims, there tends to be very high levels of sunlight. At the south pole, there's like 4 peaks with greater than, I think, 80% sunlight during the lunar day.
Which is good for what? Oh, I guess we'll get to that later. Yeah.
Lots of power.
Okay. Power. Does somebody, you guys, other guys want to jump back in a moment? Well, let me ask you this then. I've heard talk, is there aluminum on the moon?
Ilmenite has aluminum.
Well, no, ilmenite is titanium and iron and oxygen, but there's plenty of aluminum oxides on the moon. The problem, aluminum is very common. It's common on Earth as well, but aluminum was unknown to human civilization until the late 19th century because it takes so much energy to separate from oxygen. You know, so we had iron for 3,000 years before we had aluminum. And so while aluminum is there, the processes to separate it from its oxide are much more energy intensive. But, you know, iron on the moon is lighter than aluminum is on Earth. So there you go.
Fair enough. Jeffrey, if I could just show something. I was told we wouldn't be able to screen share, so can I just hold up something?
Yes.
Okay, so if I've got these 2 periodic tables, they're on my website, developspace.info, and then /periodic. There's 2 periodic tables. Let me see, can you see this?
Can see it, but can't read it.
Okay, so this is the elements that are needed for human survival. And these are the same elements and where they can be found on the moon. And so I think we know what we need and we know where they are. It's not going to be as efficient to extract these on the moon than on Earth, obviously, but we have the resources that we need to support settlement.
Very good.
So I
So
would,
you want to, yeah, go ahead.
could I add one thing on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things that's been a concern to me is having studied materials since college, the late 70s or so. I'm going to hold up a book here called the Materials Handbook. And to give you an idea, it's 1,000 pages of materials that we currently use in industrial and our civilization. So the thing is, I think there's going to be materials that we're going to have trouble finding on the moon and being able to at least cost effectively produce all of those materials. Now, I should say we don't really need all of those materials. I think we can substitute a lot of those materials with things that are available on the moon. But I have yet to see a real study that shows how many of the materials out of these 1,000 that are listed in here that we really can get by without, and how many we really need to have. So I think we're going to end up finding that it's more cost effective to bring some quantities of some of these materials from the Earth, even though they might be available on the moon or they may not be available on the moon. But there's a lot of sophisticated materials that are essential for the way we design and build things today. Now, you know, can we substitute that and find some primitive or more primitive material? Sure, I think there's a good possibility of that. But I think we need a study on that. I think that needs to be a high priority.
Robert, Doug, any further thoughts on this subject?
Let me just mention, agreeing with David, that there are elements like copper, for example, that we use a lot of, that's not readily available on the moon. And so we may have to do phytomining or more likely just ship slugs of copper and reuse it.
Robert, anything further?
Well,
on this?
no, what David said is basically correct. What we want to make on the moon, though, is the bulk of the mass of the materials that we need. Okay,
Yep.
so, you know, if you're building a greenhouse on the moon, you can make glass on the moon. Okay, you can make steel for framework if that is required. You may even be able to make the motors for the fans. Okay, but you're going to need, you know, the computer chips for the control systems and so on. And those require a very large division of labor and so forth. So you're going to bring them from Earth. So if they're simply not available on the moon, or if it would simply require too much labor in both quantity and variety to produce on the moon, you just bring it from Earth. But you want to have regenerative life support. So water, oxygen, food, okay, these sorts of bulk materials, structural material, glass, shielding material, they can all come from the moon. But you may need to bring copper. I mean, in principle, you can make aluminum on the moon, which is also a good conductor, but it takes a lot of energy. So that's out there, but aluminum wire as opposed to aluminum for structural materials might make sense. But yeah, copper is geochemically extremely rare. The only reason why we're able to use it on Earth for thousands of years is that there's natural processes on Earth that has concentrated it into ores, and those have not occurred on the moon.
Okay, let's go on to the second question. This is one that's probably the fun question, I guess. I don't know if there'll be any difference of opinion. After any precursor exploration, robotic or crewed or both, what kind of location do you think will prove to be the best choice for the first permanent outpost? Very briefly, why that choice?
Okay, well, people have been talking about the poles because of the fact that they both contain peaks of eternal light and craters of eternal darkness, which presumably are traps for water. So that's a unique combination. Now, in addition to that, though, so I'd want to choose such a location which is in proximity to iron. Now, iron is available in many broad regions of the moon. Unfortunately, the south pole of the moon is of a kind of terrain, highlands terrain, which typically is rare, is deficient in iron, and also ilmenite. However, there are anomalous outcrops in the south polar region, specific locations where there are acceptable amounts of iron. And so I'd want to choose a location that was well situated to have access to that, as well as the peak of light and the crater of ice.
David?
Yeah, I was going to comment again. We're generally seeing a lot of assumptions that the South Polar region is the place we should start, and there's a good chance that's true. I would, again, from that engineering development perspective, suggest things like trade studies to actually confirm that before we go too far into the plans on it. It's a problem I see with trade studies is that a lot of times we tend to presuppose some answer before we've got all the data, before we've identified all the criteria. There's weighting factors, so you really want to weigh out all the different options, and then also understand your dependencies on other things that you want to do. So I would say, you know, where we go is highly dependent on the results of these precursor missions, what kind of objectives those missions actually have. Are they purely scientific? Are they for exploration and development? There's a difference between what you do when you're doing exploration for science and you're doing exploration for development. So what are these prospectors looking for? How many missions? How much coverage do you get? Where is it they're looking? is it that they find, and what are the physical forms of what it is that they find. So that's one aspect to keep in mind about these prospecting missions. Having just one single prospector and then deciding what to do is perhaps limiting your selection of a more optimal solution.
Doug?
The other thing is that there's other environmental conditions. I think Bob has mentioned that too, but the extreme temperatures that may be moderated at the South Polar regions, lighting, that peak of eternal light kind of access, although depending on where you are, you can increase those by building upwards. You may be able to do that at the North Pole more effectively. The things like energy sources, the peaks of eternal light are a nice energy source, but nuclear is an option. And if you're going nuclear, then you're less dependent upon the solar energy. So again, a trade study warranted for that. Communication, access to communicate to the Earth. Do you need to start having a lot of relays, or do you have direct communication? Things like access for your transportation. Where do you want to put your landing facilities, and how do you get there? Where are the other facilities? The ilmenite and being able to access the iron. How do you get to there? So terrain has a bearing on it. So again, the objectives of the outpost, is it really purely scientific, or is it trying to do some development for
the purposes
for
of tonight,
business
we're talking about outposts that will grow and basically remain inhabited one way or the other.
Well, again, that's an assumption that the first thing you put down there will actually grow from there. It may be better to have something that's the second one, that's the big growth.
Well, that's what I said after the precursor missions. Doug, any
But I
further
think
thoughts?
but I think those are the considerations. And if you're taking a very valuable small area like around the South Polar region, how do you do master site planning so that what one operation is doing isn't interfering with other operations like shading for solar? Is this going to build up like McMurdo Station, or is it going to build up in a more logical approach?
Doug, further thoughts?
Yes, I'm actually going to be very specific in terms of where I think we should locate it. I think from the LRO, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter data, we know where the peaks of eternal light are. I think that as a starting point, I think having access to large quantities of high quality power is determinative. I think it's tells us where we want to go. And so I'm actually going to be very specific here. Here's a map of Shackleton Crater. And if you'll see right here at about the 830 position, there's a peak of eternal light A. And I'm saying that this right here is peak of eternal light A2, sort of related. And then there's a set of craters right here. These are maybe about 1 kilometer in diameter, Shackleton being 22 kilometers in diameter. And so here we have a very hopeful site where there's really close proximity of a point of light right next to a presumably permanently shadowed crater. So what I would like to see, let me just show you this. This is the lighting at the South Pole, and you see these letters of where the 4 peaks of eternal light are located. And I think that with a single rover trip, we could go from, we're going to have to miss D, but we can go from A to B to C, and possibly even actually make it to the crater that we created in Cabeus Crater. And while we travel, go and check out some of these permanently shadowed craters along the way to go ahead and assay the concentration of water there. So we don't know exactly where, but I think we have a good idea where to look.
Robert, any further thoughts?
Well, I think that Doug could well be right. As I say, you do want to go to the place where you have a permanent illumination adjacent to permanent shadow so that you have water. I'd like to choose one such place, whether it's at the South Pole or the North Pole, perhaps, where you also have access to iron, because we're going to need a structural material, and also, of course, iron and steel can be used for spare parts and to make tools. You know, there's always a thing that you're going to need that you forgot to bring to the moon, and we'll be able to make them with 3D printing if we have a local source of steel. So that's an important secondary consideration. But yes, the permanent light for power, that's number one, the water, and then thirdly, the iron.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just follow up with that, the iron and being able to build the machines to do the other work. I mean, being able to offload the need to take that iron and heavy machinery, just being able to bring the small parts and components and assemble the big heavy machines through construction is a huge advantage. So yeah, I'm with Bob on making sure that we consider access to iron.
Okay, we'll go on to question 3, and which I think is also a fun question, is what kind of habitat do you think can and will be built for this first expandable outpost?
So I guess I'm taking the lead here, Jeffrey.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. So what I would say is that I think that typically people talk about 3 different types of habitats. They talk about inflatables. Well, you know, rigid cylinders like aluminum cylinders is sort of the default approach. Inflatables, and then the ever so popular 3D printed habitats. I'm strongly in the camp of inflatables for the initial habitats, I should be clear, and then constructed, manufactured from local resources later on when we're able to do that. The advantage of inflatables over the rigid cylinders is that, of course, the size. You can pack a rather large volume into a payload if you have inflatables. Especially if you don't have to have the MMOD, the micrometeorite orbital debris layer that is about it's about 10 kilograms per meter squared is how much mass that one layer takes up. So the nice thing is you can land it in an inflatable, telerobotically pull it out to a prepared piece of land, and then cut the straps and then simply inflate it. You open a valve and lo and behold, it's constructed in an afternoon. And what I am specifically recommending is that, well, before I do that, let me just mention about the 3D printed habitats, which were, you know, there's all sorts of contests and so very popular, all sorts of really cool designs. The problem with it is either you have to have binder or you have to use a lot of energy, and you can't really structurally test it before launch because you're building on the moon. Whereas if you have like inflatables, you can build it with like Kevlar material. You can test it, make sure it's safe before launching and deploying it. Also, I think it takes a long time to 3D print a habitat, and it is, I think there'd be a lot of breakdown of the equipment along the way. So I'm rather favorable to inflatable habitats. This is ESA's concept. I think it's rather small inflatable. I really recommend a much larger inflatable, and specifically like an air mattress sort of arrangement where you have, you try to get the roof flat so that telerobots can go ahead and push regolith on the top of the habitat even prior to inflation. And because it's relatively flat, because it has these internal tethers, about every 3 meters, then the regolith is not going to be sloughing off. And you don't have to 3D print the regolith to stay on a flat roofed habitat. What I would also say is that I think that this is possibly something that we as space advocates could have an influence on. Because right now the decision makers are really focused on how to get there with the transportation. And I think at this point in time, there's still this window of opportunity to be able to have an influence in terms of what happens on the surface when we get there. And that's why I so much love this presentation and this forum, because I think this is a really critical thing. There are things that we at the space advocate level can do, which in terms of habitats that I could think could show the way. What I did back in February of 2018 when the Falcon Heavy launched, I created this using sheet plastic. I created this full-size lunar lander mock-up. And so I think, I did this in the gymnasium of my high school. I think that what we could do is we could actually go ahead and design an inflatable habitat, and we could mock it up, just a single layer of plastic, but it illustrates the point. And then that video, that time-lapse video of a habitat just constructing itself, I think could help the decision makers really think about what is the most practical initial form of habitat.
Well, that sounds like a good segue to Bob. Bob, what do you think about earthbound lunar habitat models? Reminds me of something on Mars.
Look, the inflatable habitat's a very interesting idea, and I think for the NSS to build one on Earth, full scale, made out of well, you can make plastic, you can make it out of Kevlar. You can get Kevlar fabric or canvas, whatever you like. And it needs an airlock though. Okay, it needs a rigid airlock, but a rigid airlock can be, modest in diameter. 4-meter diameter airlock is just fine. And then you make an 8-meter diameter inflatable habitat, and maybe even with a second floor, and inflate it, and then even have people play house in it a little bit, and the let's see how it goes. Now, while inflatable habitats are attractive in many ways, frankly, I think the first habitats we use on the moon may well just be the rigid aluminum ones, especially since, look, we've got launch vehicles now. Okay, New Glenn, 7-meter fairing, SLS, 8-meter fairing, Starship, 9-meter fairing. One could put quite voluminous habitat modules with, on landers that would fit in the fairings of these things and just send them to the moon. Now, SpaceX is talking about landing Starships on the moon. That's hard, despite the artwork that they have supplied showing it landing on the moon. There really is a very serious plume impingement problem associated with landing such a large thing on the moon on virgin ground. However, once we have people on the moon, they could build landing pads, and then you could land a Starship on the moon on that for sure, and without the plume impingement problem. And now you have an apartment house sitting on the moon. I don't think there's too much of a problem in creating initial habitats, whether rigid or inflatable, on the moon. And once we have an initial beachhead, they can create landing pads to land Starships on the moon. There's a number of attractive options for dealing with this.
David?
Yeah, so one of my colleagues was the structural manager for space station for the aluminum space station pressurized modules. And he and I've had a lot of discussion about using aluminum modules prefabricated to go to the moon. And the conclusion we've come to is, while that was good for space station, it's still a lot of loads that have to be handled by those structures. So it makes them heavier just to be able to survive the launch environment. It may not be really what we want to do if we can either bring up an inflatable, or we can bring in more use of more of the native materials, as one of the folks I've been working with from Skidmore Owings in Merrill has pointed out. At ISDC last year, SOM had made some presentations that I thought were really excellent. SOM is the company that was the architecture engineering company that designed and built the largest, tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. And it turns out they have been contracted with ESA to do studies of construction and utilization of materials combinations. Their approach is kind of mostly still thinking inflatable. I found on the web just as we were going here, I don't know if you can see this, but this is in the ground hangar, a module. It's a combination, I think, of some pressurized elements and some rigid shell, if I remember the concept. This is kind of what they show it looking like at the South Polar region with a number of these modules deployed. And they also have kind of looked at, just again, kind of getting back to this idea of a master plan, how all of these would be laid out so that there's a logical thing. So I think that's a good example of some things that, we need to, again, getting back to those trade studies, look at what the options are. If we're not at the polar region and there are lava tubes, that clearly ought to be an option, although there's problems with the rubble on the floor of the lava tubes and all. But and thinking about expansion, which I think is kind of the next question, so that's a lead into that. Those are some thoughts I have on it.
Let me ask all of you this question. We all grew up on pictures of row after row of domes on the moon, or something like you see in the pictures of Mars habitats, one hab after another. But am I correct in thinking that whatever you use, whether it's a canned hab or an inflatable hab, it will have to be covered by regolith rather than sitting there exposed on the surface? Or can it sit on the surface exposed?
It can sit on the surface exposed. The radiation levels on the surface of the moon are, well, they're similar to those in the ISS, with the exception that you are exposed to solar flares, which is the cosmic rays are the same, because cosmic rays reach the ISS. Earth blocks out half the sky, while the moon would block out half the sky of them.
Yeah.
But so you would need a solar flare storm shelter in the lunar habitat to go into, or a basement, which would also do it. But other than that, they can be on the surface. Look, if you were setting up a moon colony and you're going to have children and then people are going to be born and raised on the moon, and then you want to have more substantial radiation protection. And that you might want to, either use a lava tube or excavate underground, so just as people are proposing to do for Mars. You create, a shopping mall underground in which people are living, and then the surface domes and such for people to come up to periodically. But in terms of, a lunar base, that people are going to go there and stay for 3 months and then go back to Earth, there's no reason why it has to be buried.
Yeah. Now, an interesting thing I've seen in some of the SOM with MIT work that they've been doing is having the idea of the basement, having a tall structure which reaches up to the eternal light zone on the upper floors. It has a basement, so it's got the radiation shielding down in the basement. There's been discussion about dosage levels based on the actual environment conditions and the length of stay that people are going to be there. So people that may be there for shorter stay, you may allow greater exposure working in the higher environments. So that, there's, again, a lot of options. I think, trying to just pick one right now without having done more of these studies is probably not going to end up being an optimal.
Well, the bottom line
approach.
impression I get is whichever kind of thing we do, the structures that we would need to put there are well within our capability of producing. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I like that. Well, let me go on to the fourth question, which will probably be the longest, particularly since it's the last formal question. How would the outpost be designed to be expanded? And I guess, how would that go? Why don't we start with you, Doug?
Okay. I see here that I do have a share screen option. Can I use that, or do I need to? I have like 13 of these things, and it'd be much
You have
better
to
if I
talk
could.
to Bert.
Bert?
Yes, go ahead and share your screen. That's no problem. Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. So I think that there is this is little harder to pin down because there's a lot of different ways that things can be done. And frankly, I think just to be clear to the audience, I think that, you know, the three of us panelists, we are sharing what we think ought to happen rather than what will happen. We want the best choices made going forward. But unfortunately, there's factors involved that sometimes lead away from the best choice. So I'm just going to go ahead and share with you how I conceive the base to grow over time. Myself, I know David, I'm not sure about Bob, but David and I agreed that we would like to see some cargo landers first, including using the full-scale landers, the human-scale landers first, to go ahead and gain some flight experience, but also that there is great value in sort of pre-positioning and setting, you know, getting hardware on the ground first. David and I, we agreed that the power is got to be one of the very first things that we set up. I don't think we need to go with nuclear right off the bat. I think we can utilize, as we start at the South Pole, go ahead and utilize, I like the idea of solar drapes. That's the highest number of watts per kilogram, is that people can look it up at developspace.info/drapes to see it, watch an animation of that. But just a whole wall of solar drapes being going up on telescoping towers. And the after that, I think should come telerobots. I'm of the belief that mostly we need to get there, and when we get there, I think that our roboticists and you know, industrial engineers are able to produce the hardware necessary to be able to start extracting the resources, I would say, even before crew arrives. Now, a lot of people think, well, crew is necessary to maintain the telerobots, and I think that is to some extent true, but it's not true in that I think telerobots can be designed with like quick release mechanisms to be able to easily swap out spare parts. And so if you were to ship a 1 kilogram motor, let's say, and you were to keep a 10 kilogram telerobot working, and that 10 kilogram telerobot produces 100 kilograms of product, whether water or metals, then that 1 kilogram of spare part ended up in essentially 100 kilograms of payload equivalent. And so I think that we can go a long ways just shipping spare parts and keeping the operations going. But prior to crew arrival, I think the thing to do is to go ahead and land habitat, telerobotically cover it with regoliths so that they can extend their stay. And I'm a strong proponent of doing things to extend crew stay, because every time you rotate crew on some sort of arbitrary schedule, you're risking the lives of the crew being sent, and then the crew's lives being sent back to Earth. And so I think if we can go ahead and reduce that risk to both crew life as well as the program, I think that we should rather use biomedical indicators as to when the crew needs to return to Earth. If they're getting close to critical bone mineral density threshold, then we send them back. 3 days, they're back on Earth. So that sort of thing. So then after the habitat is set up, then we have the initial crew, which I think we should recognize that this could be an extremely historic group of people, and I think we would know that we are writing history. And so I think we ought to send about 8, which is an easily remembered, that's sort of your sitcom cast. And then hit the pause button of sending anybody else, because we want to write history. This is history that parents are going to be telling their kids, in the future. And then that initial crew, I doubt it's going to be this way, but I would like for the initial crew to be private individuals, but basically company workers doing a public-private program, and the job of this company and these workers is to develop, if it's not already operating, but at least maintain the telerobots that are harvesting the ice for propellant in particular, but also life support. And that they would also already begin to be extracting the metals from the regolith and producing metal parts. The sooner that we get to do this, the sooner we can get to about 85% of the mass that doesn't have to be departed from LEO. In other words, becoming 85% mass independent from Earth. So this initial crew is doing sort of smaller scale ISRU. I would like to see a greenhouse in the initial habitat and attempt to go ahead and implement what's working on Earth, go ahead and implement it on the moon. And then after they're sort of stabilized and got operations going, then we are sending more cargo missions that starts getting into what I call specialty modules. And these are things like a life support hab or a garden hab, or et cetera, machine hab. And start landing these things, and then including a dorm hab, and then going and landing more crew from perhaps from other nations, to be able to go ahead and start setting up really the infrastructure necessary for a growing base. And then from there, I think it's just a matter of expanding more and more of those specialty habs, the sections of specialty habs, until you're getting to the point where you have everything necessary for settlement. Because initial settlement, what does initial settlement need? It needs power, it needs resources like life support, it needs food, these sorts of things. Well, a public-private program, government can pay for the development of these things and the implementing of it, and sort of get rid of the risk for their own benefit. But then also, then you can have private individuals go ahead and come on board. So in the maybe 3 minutes I have left, let me just go through and show. I have created, let me share this here. So I've created just a PowerPoint illustration. Don't think too much about this. This is just some initial thinking, and I'm sure it'll be different. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get rid of the audio. Okay. Okay, can you guys see this? Can you guys see this?
We see it, Doug.
Thank you. Okay, so I think it should, I think that it should start with what I call a unihab, and this has for 8 people, but it has like an area for greenhouse. It has an area for living and working areas. And unihab, as I indicated, should be flat roofs so the telerobots can easily push regolith on top of it, providing shielding throughout the habitat. The second, the next thing you do is go ahead and perhaps have telerobots go ahead and dig trenches or on surface, put in these connecting corridors. Then comes a set of basically infrastructure things that's going to serve the whole base. So you have a sanitation hab, you have machine hab, support hab, life support hab, outdoor metallurgy, spin hab to extend crew stay, storage of course, and then dorm hab, which is preparing for the next phase. The next phase has more probably international astronauts coming, and what they can do is they can begin to work on the food habitats. I'm showing the different ones that I imagined here, plus also some agricultural habs that are more for quality of life, a jungle hab, maybe a beach hab, like was in Biosphere 2. And then after that could go, when you're producing the food, now you can have the kitchen hab and the cafe hab. Moving on to fitness, sports, golfing, swim hab. These things are getting prepared for the later private settlers. that needs some quality of life, particularly the spouses that want that, otherwise they're not going to move to the moon. As you're getting prepared to welcome the early private crew, you can perhaps have a welcome hab. This could be part of a network of sort of hotels along the Lunar Grand Tour that people could stay at. And then the next thing would be, as you get, especially the older, less healthy settlers, then you want to really make sure that you have all of these medical habs, and then church hab, meeting hab, movie hab, these sorts of things. Now you're really beginning to look like a settlement. So that's my scenario for how we could go from the initial habitat to a full settlement, an initial settlement, I should say.
Can you unshare now?
Excuse me?
Can you unshare?
Yes.
Robert, what are your thoughts on how we would do this as we expand our basic settlement?
Well, the first thing is we want to find the right place. And so I think we may have initially a more of a network of bases than a large concentration of this kind, although we'll get there. But to start with, yes, as Doug said, you want to land a habitat on the moon before you send the astronauts there. So yes, you send a hab module or two to a location that you've identified as probably an extremely favorable place. Then you send the astronauts there, okay? And we're looking now at the sorts of landing craft that NASA has decided to support the development of. That is there's the Blue Moon one and there's the Lunetics one, and there may be similar ones. But they're landing in a relatively small craft, but they'll have hab modules there. So they can get out, they can go into the hab modules, complete the setup, set up the local array of solar panels, and then they need to explore. And in particular, yes, they want to identify if there is, in fact, a nearby mineable deposit of water that can be mined, and to start making, see if they can extract it and start making a propellant. Now, if you have propellant there, then it becomes very easy to repeatedly visit this site and explore that area. Now, if it is satisfactory, fine, we'll get to phase 2. But if not, we'll establish further exploratory bases at other locations. Okay, so until we find a place that works. Okay, and then I think what we'll do is start landing additional hab modules. Some of these will actually be habitats that are fitted out for accommodations. Others will be empty habitat modules that are filled with all sorts of equipment. And then there you go. Now, so yes, the first thing to mine is the water. The second thing is the iron. That's later. But those are the key elements of this. We'll want to set up substantial power systems because the making of propellant requires a lot of power. We're going to need at least 100 kilowatts. And to give you an idea, that's 1,000 square meters of solar panels if you're doing it with solar. Or 10 kilopower reactors, unless they scale the thing up, which they should. But that's what you need. And some of the equipment will be excavation equipment, unless, of course, we're set up near a lava tube. Okay, if we can find a place with a lava tube near a peak of light and a hole of water, and there you go. You know, that's the sort of thing that we could build. Now, there's other activities that people are going to want to do on the moon. Astronomy, for example, both optical and radio, and other things. So the base is going to have to support that. That's the sort of thing I would do. But the very first thing is pre-land some habitats with extra solar panels, then send the astronauts there, then set up an operation for excavating water ice and turning it into propellant.
David?
Yes, so one of the things that was really interesting in doing Space Station was designing it to be expanded, being able to bring all the different modules and truss elements and everything up. The thing that we always had to do with the station, there was a concept that we called scarring, and I don't know where the term came from, but it basically has to do with how you design everything so that you can add things in the future. And so it's a complex thing to add all those interfaces and the ability to plug modules in. One of the things with Station was every module was really kind of dependent on every other module. You had power, you had to route power through the different modules. You had thermal control, which was out on the truss, and that had to be routed to each of the modules. So that's one design philosophy that I looked at a lot. And obviously, I was lead for testing all that stuff, and it got very complex. Another design philosophy that I've seen is like the Russian Mir station. Every module was self-contained. Every module brought its own power, its own thermal, its own data, its own different pad life support systems and everything. And all you had to do really is have an architecture that allows you to just keep plugging more and more modules in. And I tend to like that kind of an approach. I like the idea of having a standard module, whether it's an inflatable, whether even if it was a pre-constructed can of aluminum, or whether it's built more from native materials. But being able to take and replicate the same sort of basic design it once, build it many times, get the learning curve down on manufacturing, get improvements in it as you try the first one and find issues. You know what to change to make the next one better. You get reliability growth much faster with it. So I really kind of favor that where you can use it. You probably can't do it every place, but you know, to the extent you can have some kind of an architecture like that, certainly I think should be considered. Other things is how much land area or lunar surface area do you want to allocate? If you're building into a lava tube, do you have a lava tube that's deep enough, extends far enough back that you've got room to add back into it after your first modules are put in, or your first segments of it, if you will. If you're in a crater, do you have enough room for, say, redundant hab sections? How you accommodate emergency situations, being able to get people from one hab area to another if there's a breach in the hull and a leak or something like that. Those are all things I think need to be considered on it.
Let me ask you a question. You guys talked about, for example, Mir having each module being self-sufficient for everything. But how important is it for what we send to the moon to have, as much as possible, things all be modular, so they could all have the same shell, just like we have the same cans going up into the space, you know, for small satellites? How important are have everything modular?
Well, it's one design philosophy, and you know, I don't necessarily try to say you exclusively do that. There's a design philosophy or opposing kind of design philosophies of centralized versus distributed architectures. And for certain things, you know, having some things distributed, something centralized may end up making the most sense.
I do think we need standards, sort of an international, some sort of committee to, you know, figure out who's doing what and how does it all fit together. I personally would like to see sort of a master plan that people could be aiming towards. It may need to be adjusted along the way, but I think that the different halves can be developed. You know, think about if the cost of access to the moon, if it turns out that works out to be remarkably low, then I think about 2/3 of the countries could afford to purchase. No, it's more than that. It's more than 2/3 of the countries could afford to purchase at least one seat on a mission of lunar exploration. And so just imagine the astronauts from Iraq setting up a garden hab, because after all, there's the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and so they take pride in that. And so they follow the standards, and they maybe hire contractors, and they build this habitat, and they take great pride, and their people take great pride in their astronauts setting this thing up and connecting it to the rest of the growing international base.
How do you envision the different segments, let me just call them modules for the moment, whether they're the same or not, being connected? Will they be all real close together? Would you expect them to separate it with tubes, and what would the tubes be made of, and how would that work?
Probably some kind of way of separating them with some tubes. You probably want to have some pressure hull. We can call them airlock for lack of a better term, but for emergency situations, people can go from one to another and close off the area until somebody can go in and repair it. You may need to have that tube section in between connect as kind of an airlock, so that somebody can eventually go back in and start the repairs. So that's a reasonable approach, I would think.
I would add, one of the things I've learned from this long sequestration, living in a very long building, it's really nice to have an indoor garage to do your running on. You don't have to put on. So I can see why tunnels on the moon might have an additional function there, as long as you have a high ceiling, of course.
Good point.
Yeah.
Which, by the way,
that's another thing we've gone into, is you don't want to have the same ceiling height that you've got on Earth, because if somebody jumps up, they can jump 6 times as high.
No, which is really,
I calculated actually the height that would need to be, and I forget the exact number, it's something about 16 feet. But the difference is that if you can, our cylinders are about 8 foot high. If you jump real hard, you're not going to bump your head against them, but you might be able to touch it with your hands. So the thing is, you want in 1/6 gravity, you want it to be, if you jump 2 feet high, you want to multiply that by 6. Except that as you're going up, you'll have plenty of time to sort of catch yourself, and so maybe it doesn't have to be 16 feet.
But those are the design things that people need to be thinking about as they start designing this. Don't try to use same dimensions of everything. That swim module is swim hab. Like I said I mentioned in the chat that that the opportunity for somebody to have a high dive and make I don't know how many flips you could actually do before you hit the water on it, but that'd be a lot of fun.
I've done the calculations.
I figured I should have figured.
Yes. Well, in lunar dance, imagine dance in 1/6 gravity. The amount of air time that you would get is actually longer than people have time when they're on a high dive, jumping off into the water. You actually have more time, and so as you jump in the air, you could do numerous, moves within each hop. So sports, I mean, this is crazy. We're going to have to invent new sports to take advantage of the reduced gravity. It gets quite interesting as you look into the details.
That's a very interesting point you raised here, because in all the things people have read or suggested about what you could do on the moon, or why people would want to go to the moon. We talk about hotels, but the whole sporting experience you could get, particularly for people who can't really do it on Earth, we could bring a whole different contingent of people to the moon. Although I still go back to, I think, was it Alan Shepard? I was wondering what a 9-hole golf course on the moon would look like. That would be kind of interesting. Probably need a GPS on the golf ball.
So I've thought about this one. I think playing golf outdoors on the moon is, it's been done before, but doing it in a spacesuit, I think it would get old real quick. If you had tried to golf indoors, you're going to have 6 times the distance. And that is one long habitat.
Yeah.
Yep.
So just for reference, in the space settlement design competition, we almost always have some kind of a requirement. These high school kids have to design to a set of RFP requirements, and we really have fun with the ones about, you know, what the recreation ought to be to take advantage of the environment. And, you know.
Robert, when you were designing Mars colonies, Mars bases, what did you envision for surface transportation, and whether was there any road building or not, and how might that apply to what we might do on the moon?
Well, when I first designed Mars missions, I thought of the surface transportation as being pressurized rovers, that is, vehicles perhaps about the size of SUVs that are pressurized, in which you could travel around in a shirt sleeve and go long distances, stay overnight if you want to, and then periodically put on a spacesuit and do EVA. The Mars Society, as you know, has built 2 practice Mars stations, Mars Analog Research Stations, one in the Arctic and one in the desert near Hanksville, Utah. And we've had now over 200 crews of 2 or more weeks each, attempting to do sustained programs of field exploration in one or the other of these stations. And what we have found is that the optimal vehicle is not something like that, but more like an all-terrain vehicle in which you ride it in your spacesuit. It's a far more nimble vehicle. It's able to deal with rough terrain. If it gets stuck, a person can lift it and get it out. You know, and while we haven't done it, my philosophy would be, if you did want to do an overnight trip, you could have a trailer in which you had an inflatable hab that you could, basically a pop-up camper, as it were, that you could take with you and use that to live in overnight and to eat. So, I mean, building roads is takes a lot of work. And you know, when people established settlements in the West, well, of course, they didn't have cars then, but the horses, you know, could deal with terrain that didn't have roads. And that was very important. And roads are going to come later. You know, if we have a path from the base to, say, the crater, in other words, a place that you go to repeatedly, conceivably one might build a road or throw down some, well, rails. That'd be hard, wouldn't it? Maybe a cable car might be the thing, rather than a road or a rail system. But basically, a trodden path and vehicles that can deal with it, I think, is the way to go.
Well,
Yeah,
let me
well,
go back.
anything you can do to be out of the dust, you know, if it's a rail, a monorail, a cable car, or if at least paving the road, it's going to help.
Jeffrey,
It's
could
going
I,
to be a real problem.
yeah, let me
Doug?
address the road situation. You know, there would be different levels of roads. There'd be the level 1 dirt road, which is nothing more than like compacted dirt. The Apollo 17 crew rover drove at, I think, 11 miles per hour in totally unprepared situation. So I think that it is, let me screen share to show you what NASA has already developed. So this is their, I forget the name of, I think it's Chariot, and they put a blade on it. And so I can imagine something like this that could go ahead and sort of flatten out the sort of the bumps because of the small craters. There's one of the members of my space development network. He's actually working, he's trying to get in contact with University of Arizona Space Image Center there to go ahead and get a very high detailed slope map so that we can actually identify where roads should go to minimize the slope. And there's ideas about how you can have electric steamrollers, but they're basically vibrating to go ahead and compact just the width of a single vehicle. And I don't think it would take a long time to be able to build roads of significant distance, especially if you have multiple road makers going at the same time. And if you could get up to about 25 miles per hour on a compacted dirt road using self-driving electric, sort of your Cybertruck chassis vehicles, you could deliver volatiles from the poles to the equators to the equator in about 3 days, driving 24/7. And so, and you could go ahead and take like the creep rocks back to the poles and the metals, et cetera. So this dirt road thing, I think it's the easiest way to create initial roads. Let me stop sharing here.
Well, let me ask you another question about roads and rovers. In the 1/6 gravity, if you would attach a trailer to a rover, or maybe a couple of trailers to have it like a train, would you have a too substantial a risk of tipping with 1/6 gravity?
So Jeffrey, in our concept for the construction of lunar roads, after you prepare the road, you have vehicle drive over it and record its angle and you know how much it's bouncing up. You can record that quite accurately, and then in the future, as the vehicle's driving over that point, if there's one area that just does have a dip or something like that, then the vehicle slows down automatically so that it's always got good traction. If you're carrying a trailer, you can take that into account. I think this is a solvable problem, you know, for engineers.
Well, there was no road, Robert, when you were thinking about trailers on Mars with 1/3 gravity, was tipping appear to be a problem there?
Well,
Do we have no roads?
tipping can be a problem. Tipping can be a problem with all-terrain vehicles on Earth. You're going to have to drive at moderate speeds, especially in areas that you haven't done before. Once we establish paths, then yes, you can do exactly what Doug said, is that you can map it, as it were, and there can be cautions that are programmed into the vehicles that in these locations, you know, in other words, instead of a sign that says slow down, you know, steep curve, you know, 15 miles an hour, it can be automatic. But sure, these are issues. And I think a technology like what Doug showed is quite interesting for creating dirt roads. I don't know about dirt roads from the pole to the equator, but dirt roads from the base to the crater, yes.
Okay, let me have some questions that came in here. First of all, Doug, apparently what was posted in the chat room about the URL for your periodic table apparently didn't link. Could you repeat it? Just say what the URL is for people.
Okay, let me confirm that it is working, but I'm almost sure it is.
Go
It's,
ahead.
yeah, it is working. It's developspace.info/periodic. I'm going to go ahead and post it again in the chat.
Thank you.
It should work.
And a question came in is, how difficult would it be to simply have machines that tunnel into lunar rock?
For what purpose?
Like to build habitats or something? So they don't have a natural cave. Make your
So tunneling into rock, you've either got to have a lot of mass to be able to get the tunneling to work, or you've got to have some kind of friction grabbing system that kind of tunnels and pulls it in. But I've seen concepts for the latter, and yeah, you may want to tunnel in to do a habitat back in a tunnel. But you don't have a lava tube and you want to try doing tunneling. Plus, we've really only scratched the surface of the moon for any kind of materials. So tunneling and doing that, there's a good chance we'll find something down deeper than we've been able to look.
Okay, so do I infer that at least the initial stages of our outpost, when you're building habitats, you would basically, if nothing else, dig a trench and put regolith over rather than boring through rock with the tunnel?
That could be an option.
Somebody asked, what solutions are there that you've been thought about to deal with the lunar dust?
So I have dealt with this extensively. People go to developspace.info/dust. It goes through the blast effects, the health effects, the getting into the gears, and there's pretty straightforward solutions for each problem.
Well, that's encouraging. Well, yes,
I
Doug?
would,
David?
I would say until we actually are able to get real lunar dust with the sharp edges and all of that, of the actual dust, the lunar simulant that we have does not have the right physical characteristics. Until we actually start working with the real kind of dust, I think there's a lot of potential solutions, but I don't think we really know that much about which one's going to work how well, and overall, how do we manage it. There is a concept for a suit port that NASA's been looking at and running around on a rover on it. It's got some real issues. I had the responsibility of looking at the maintainability of that some years ago, and the issue with that that's often overlooked is if you put your suit out there, you climb in through the back, and the idea is the suit's on the outside of a wall, and you climb through the back. For anybody that hasn't seen this, you climb in, and somebody helps you put the back piece on it, and then you take off and go do your lunar excursion with it, and then you come back and you have help from the inside getting out of it. And so if there's a problem with the suit and you have to repair it, what do you do if you got hard vacuum outside, full lunar dusty environment outside? No way to go get it except maybe go take another suit, go out, and then, how do you get that suit back in where you can work it? The solution I see to that is to add an intermediate pressurizable area between the suit port and the exterior of the settlement.
Yes, Doug.
I think that
Robert.
well, there's a lot of issues here. I think they're solvable, but there's certainly issues. They're not trivial. I do think that while, yes, we can initially do just as they did in Apollo, just land on the dirt and take your chances. When we establish a base, we're going to want to suppress the dust by fusing the ground, in particular where the landing pad is. That is to bring ships down and have them blow dust all over the place every time they land. And in particular, much larger vehicles like a Starship, you just don't want to be doing that on loose lunar regolith. And I mean, the exhaust velocity of a rocket is actually greater than lunar escape velocity. You can blow material right up into orbit. You can, if you land Starship on the moon on a unprepared ground, you could literally destroy the gateway with debris that you throw into the sky, which is an interesting trade. But anyway, what you can do is, an initial Pioneer base. They use solar concentrators, perhaps, to heat the regolith and fuse it so it's not dust, so that it is essentially glassified rock, and then you can land on that and not be throwing dust everywhere.
Apart from rocket exhaust, the moon does not suffer from winds like on Mars, which we've seen the effect on solar panels or stuff. But I'm wondering, will just the casual EVA activity stir up enough dust that it might impact the equipment you still have on the surface? Or is that likely to be too diffuse to be a problem?
Well, no, I think it's a real problem. We saw what happened to the spacesuits of the Apollo astronauts. They got very, very dusty very quickly. So I think it is a real problem. I am sort of working with some of our space preservationist people because I think that a problem on the moon like that you don't have on Mars is that when you drive and you leave road tracks behind you, those road tracks could last an extremely long time. And if you have hundreds of people going around the moon, it could get sort of cluttered up, and it's wind isn't going to blow it away. It's not going to remove that. So I think that a solution would be is to go ahead and create a network of roads and have the vehicles drive on the roads. And then when people exit to go to like a new place, there's one idea, I don't know if this is a workable idea or not, but to have sort of a stick a stick walking robot that lifts up the leg and drops it down to make just little holes, and it doesn't actually leave a track behind.
That's kind of cool. I only have a couple more questions, then we'll,
Okay.
I think I'll turn it back to Bert.
Jeffrey, yes, we're at 10:30. We'd like to wrap it up.
Yes.
Okay.
You have a couple more questions. One of them, one question was, what are the technologies that most need to be developed now to get ready to sustain a lunar outpost?
The technologies to mine water ice and to, I mean, we have electrolysis, but to do it in a form that actually works on the moon in that environment, and to make, to liquefy and store the propellant, and to transfer the propellant from tanks on the lunar surface to vehicles and so forth. I mean, none of this is new science. We're not talking about Los Alamos 1943, but we're talking about new hardware, new technology that deals with well understood physical systems, but in a very novel environment, including dealing with sharp dust particles and all of that.
Do you expect that most waste would be recyclable, or do they have a problem of disposing of it?
Recycle,
everything's recyclable. Everything you bring to the moon is of extraordinary value, whether it's organic wastes, which are composed of materials that are hard to come by on the moon, and certainly all be reprocessed for one purpose or another. Any lander, expendable lander that goes to the moon, you've got a ton of high-grade aluminum alloy there.
Right.
Much better than anything you're going to make on the moon, even if you can make aluminum. I mean, you've got everything is recycled. Okay. So let me ask each of you for one parting comment. If you have any thoughts you would like to pass on to the audience about what we'll do when we get to the moon, or what we should do when we get to the moon, either way.
Well, I would say,
David, you want to start?
yeah, I would say let's try to figure out what the materials are exactly, what form they're in, how we can best use them, how we can process them, what are the differences between processing them in 1G versus 0 microgravity, and what can you do in 1/6G with stuff? How can you best utilize those? Can we get people there that have the freedom to have some time to experiment with things, to try different stuff, not necessarily having every hour, every 15-minute increment or 10-minute increment of their time scheduled, so that they can experiment with stuff, just try different things. And then we've got to see what becomes enabled by whatever they find. So that's the exciting part to me.
Robert, what's your thought?
I would second that and emphasize it. Don't overplan. Explore. Be open to possibilities. Be flexible. We don't really know what we're going to find there, and we're going to want to adjust our plans to both deal with unexpected setbacks, but also to exploit novel opportunities that the situation presents itself to us. So be flexible, be opportunistic, have fun.
Doug?
Yeah, I would say that I wish that there was like an organization that was focused on this very question of when we get to the moon, which I think is going to be relatively near term. Let's get ready for that. I wish there was a multimillionaire who sort of took this on as their thing, because I think we're running out of time. And I think that how we do it, whether we do it a smart way or whether we do it sort of a bureaucratic way, I think can make a huge difference. And I think there is a little vacuum for leadership. And it doesn't have to come from government. It can come from outside of government. But right now, I don't really see that.
Well, they're running out of time is a perfect segue, thank you, which I suspect Bert thinks we are already doing. But I would just like to thank the three of you for taking part in this, and basically for the preparation time I know you took to figure out how to distill everything into a few short minutes. And I'd like to thank our audience. I noticed that most of them stayed the whole thing, so I think that it's been a very useful exercise. And so I wish everybody, a virus-free stay and good luck on Saturday with the launch. And I turn it over to Bert to tell everybody what's coming next on these NSS town halls and forums. Bert, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeffrey and Doug and David and Bob. Also, my thanks. And I think on behalf of all of our attendees tonight, this was just fabulous. So we appreciate taking the time to inform us. I heard Bob, you said have fun. This was fun and informative. So again, we thank you. For everybody out there, we appreciate you hanging around. I just want to let you know what our next town hall will be, and that's next Thursday. And we have Aggie Cobrin and Rod Pyle, who are going to be talking about Ad Astra. You've probably seen the new issues. They are impressive. So they'll be talking a lot about what's going into Ad Astra and where we're going with the publication. So don't miss that. So look forward to the invite. Again, on behalf of all of us at the National Space Society, thank you for joining us this evening, and just stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you next time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.